Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TiE Silicon Valley Trendsetter series. I'm Kirtika Reddy, and it is my extreme pleasure as the board member of TiE Silicon Valley to welcome you to this very special series. This is the very first of our Trendsetter series where we have industry leaders who are influencing next generation technology and transforming the way that we will live and work. It is my extreme honor to welcome our panelists today. We have Sandhya Venkatachalam, partner with Khosla Ventures. Sandhya and I first met in an all-race cohort, and all-race is an industry body that is focused on increasing female participation in the venture industry. And for one, it's very hard to find female partners in the venture industry. And then if you put the deep tech lens on, they are even fewer. And Sandhya, I think our cohort had a fair share of all of the female partners in the deep tech space. So very, very excited to have Sandhya, who has been spending years specifically on the topic that we are going to discuss today, voice technology, developing and investing, developing her investing thesis, investing in some amazing companies. And we're going to start the panel by hearing from her and how she thinks about this industry. We also have, and I can spend a lot of time talking about many intersections between the panelists here, but we're going to jump right into the discussion. And we have Krish Ramaneni, CEO and co-founder Fireflies.ai, and we have Zohaib Ahmed, CEO of Resemble AI. In the audience, Sandhya, Krish, and Zohaib, we have seasoned entrepreneurs, developers, all the way to TiE Youth, a very strong showing from our TiE Youth program, who are the 9th grade to the 12th grade cohort. So very excited to have you here to inspire these young minds, and also looking forward to a mind-expanding discussion. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Sandhya to frame the discussion for us, and then we'll have Krish and Zohaib share a little bit more about how they see the world, and we'll get into the panel discussion. We invite the audience to send in your comments if something resonates with you. If you have a question, type it into chat. We'll try to weave it in as we go along. We also have a good 10 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. With that, Sandhya, all yours.
Thanks, Kirtika. Delighted to be here. I've spent 21 years, that's probably dating me, trying to solve and enhance the use of voice in software and other technology applications. The fact that I was not able to solve many problems has set the stage for our two awesome founders and many others like them. Maybe Krish and Zohaib, you can do a quick intro each, so the audience knows, what all of us is doing, and then I'll try to frame the discussion a little bit. Zohaib, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. My name is Zohaib Ahmed. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Resemble AI. We're building a synthetic voice engine that allows anyone to create artificial voices that have all sorts of emotions and can be used in low latency conversational experiences.
Hi guys, I'm Krish Ramaneni, co-founder and CEO at Fireflies.ai. We're building an AI voice assistant that joins your meetings, like this one right here, takes notes, summarizes everything, and makes it easily searchable. Our vision is to be able to create a new sort of system of record that organizes all of your org's voice conversations so that you can preserve knowledge, unlock insights, and kick off actions afterwards with just the sound of your voice.
Awesome. So I'll just set the backdrop here and attempt to share my screen. Cool. So, when I think about voice or voice tech, I don't think about how many wearable devices have been shipped, because when I started, there were no wearable devices. I don't think about how much software has been built. I really think about how to enhance what we already do as humans quite naturally and frequently. I know we're all most of us are knowledge workers, and we write a lot and text a lot and send a lot of emails and live in this digital world. But on average, people speak, roughly 5, 10, or, sometimes even 15 times as many words as they write or even read. And that's the opportunity, is to make all of technology as easy to use as what we do every single day, which is just speak to each other as humans. And I personally believe that voice has the potential to replace text as the universal digital interface. Now, this is already happening a little bit in consumer. It's not ubiquitous, but I use my voice to tell Alexa many times to turn up the music, or shut my blinds, or turn up the heat. But it's less obvious in enterprise and how we work, which is most of what's the focus today. Though I know Resemble, your technology can actually be used across the board. And so, I think this is a very simple idea, but if you really think about interfacing with everything that you do at work with voice versus a keyboard, it sort of opens up the possibilities of really what's sort of possible. So I believe we'll be able to use voice, to understand intent, to automate work, and to make better decisions. A lot of the companies up on this slide, including Fireflies, which Chris will talk about a little bit more, are doing exactly that. Voice conversations are the last massive treasure trove of untapped data that exists. Trying to understand what is actually happening between people, what decisions are made in a meeting, the ability to coach and deliver insights, the ability to take those insights and actually do something with them. This is what a lot of the folks, on this slide, that I've seen are attacking in different ways. Folks, we're an investor at KV in OpenAI. And, it's amazing what GPT-3 models are sort of enabling in terms of search and summarization of voice and text content, and really the sharing of valuable voice content. So it's not even just factually what we say or the text, but the tone, the expression, the things that really make us understand each other as humans. These are now being able to be captured in a variety of ways, and analyzed and shared, by many of the companies, that I've met and sort of on this slide. I think a second big thesis we have is really to use voice to simulate people and create really personalized experiences, but at scale. And this, is an area that Zohaib, I think, will go into in much more detail with the technology and products that Resemble's building. But the idea that you can finally truly not know whether the person or the voice you're hearing on the other side of a phone or in a Zoom meeting is actually synthesized or someone quote unquote real, and it doesn't really matter anymore. And what's the point of all this? Well, to actually be able to start creating really personalized experiences, whether they're geographic, whether they're cultural, whether they're just preferences, and really in sort of the enterprise landscape, giving small businesses or individual creators the ability to have the same levels of sales and marketing and customer support as very large businesses who spend lots of money on this to generate content, to generate new experiences. So I think it's pretty cool. And then the sort of last major thesis that we have, and this is really nascent, and I know there's gonna be a lot of raised eyebrows, but it's happening, is really to use voice to interface with and even build applications and eventually write code itself. What's like the point of this besides, sort of cool demos? Well, I think with advances in voice and NLP and other language models, using voice as the interface for non-technical users to interact with applications is starting to come into view. And this really starts to solve the problem of, one, people not understanding how to use your software tool, right? So product managers spend a lot of time on simplifying interfaces, but what's more natural than just speaking to a software tool or speaking into a system and telling it what you actually want, and then directing it from there to not just navigate through an application and solve a problem, but maybe even build them over time. So this, to me, is one of the more exciting areas. There's a bunch of stealth startups that didn't want to put their logos up on here, but I think it's an area that's rich, and I'd love the panelist view on this as well, since it's slightly outside their core areas of expertise. Would love to get their views. So now I'm just going to open it up to Zohaib and Krish a little bit. I would love for you to tell the audience, whether you agree with these theses, but, in the areas that you're operating in, what is your vision for how voice is evolving, where voice technology is evolving, and, what do you think will be possible, in 3 to 5 years? Krish, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. So I think that there is definitely a line that gets blurred between voice and when we look at enterprise versus consumer. But really, it's the ability to do some of the things we're already doing today and just taking it to the next level. So for example, voice and chatbots today already allow us to talk to customers, right? So when you call up customer support, there's an IVR system. For those on the call, IVR is like interaction voice recognition. And so it asks you some questions and then it directs you to the right person, right? So in 5 to 6 years, or even sooner, I think what's going to happen is we can have full-blown conversations with those voice agents, and they understand the intent, and then they're able to kick off actions automatically. So that's something that we saw a little bit already with Google Duplex. If you guys have seen it, where you can reserve a spot at a restaurant. But what's stopping us from doing something like that for having automated phone interviews, where there's a voice agent that goes and does my phone screening or shows me voice demos? So the possibilities are limitless. And the key to that is being able to actually understand intent and be able to take action based on that.
Yeah, totally agree, Krish. I think from a voice recognition perspective, I think it's been around for a little while longer, and I think a lot of good work has been done, and we've moved very far from like the old days of just intent and slot filling to where we are today. From a generation perspective, I always like to say a lot of people look at voice generation and still think text to speech. They still think text like accessibility is like the only use case. And there's a lot of skepticism around how well it works. It's kind of like how a lot of computer vision folk or computer graphics folk probably felt when Photoshop came around, and then when the green screen came around, and then when mocap came around, and each one was better than the last. And it took a little while to adopt the next thing. And when you adopt it, you don't go back. With voice technology or generative technology, at least, what we're seeing is there's tons of movement in terms of branding and personalization and advertising. And the question rises, like, if it's super obvious whether you watch a YouTube video and you and I might, like everyone on this call can watch the same YouTube video and get served a different ad. And that's because that's been personalized to us. And we Google something and we might get different results. That's because it's been tailored to us. And so everything textually we see, everything visually we see, it's kind of tailored to us, but everything we kind of hear is stagnant. It's all static. And it's not tailored. It's kind of the same thing. So a lot around advertising, personalization. I always think, like, what can computers do that humans can't? In terms of generative tech, we did a campaign with Hrithik Roshan in India and a few other celebrities now, where we produce thousands and thousands of names, stores, addresses, and good luck getting a celebrity to sit in like a studio and say 1,000 names out loud. and then like concatenate that with like a bunch of sentences. That's like a waste of their time. They're not going to do that, and they can't. There's always going to be a name in India that they have not said. And you can use technology to actually do that in their own voice. And that's like things that aren't possible. And we're seeing more cases around entertainment, more cases around gaming, things that are a lot more expressive, where you would have used this, this person to do all the talking, and now it's very different. You can use AI technology to actually generate audio. So you no longer need to like I'm pretty sure all of us have seen a movie where the graphics are like gorgeous, like amazing graphics. And then you look at the dialogue and you're like, that was written by a 10-year-old. And that's because they probably wrote the dialogue once, and it's not an iterative process. It's you write the dialogue and you hope Kevin Hart comes in the studio and fixes up the mess. And the good actors can do that, and the bad actors really struggle. So a lot of technology, it's gone from this old era of text-to-speech, which RIP 2018, and has moved towards more generative technology, where you can do really fancy things around creativity.
You both touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to understand and get your view of what are the enabling technologies that are allowing you guys to now build what you are. The 20 years I've been sort of looking at this industry, like it didn't work, and now it works. And it's actually quite stunning, the difference even in 4 or 5 years. Would love, in each of your areas, what are some like the key technologies that you think now it works, so I'm able to build on top of it, the great products that I am?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So we look at it as what could we do now versus 5 years ago. And I think there's been a huge progress in intent mapping. We keep going back to that, but actually understanding the conversation, what is actually being said in the context of, for us at Fireflies, we're taking audio and it goes beyond the transcription. So we have to look at this audio and you get a ton of information. It's almost like a blueprint, right? You can understand tone, you can understand sentiment, you can detect how many people are talking within that. So if you have an audio file with a dozen people talking, how do you diarize between that and understand the different speakers? You also need to detect custom words that are unique to your company or your industry that needs to be trained on. So there's a whole bunch of these building blocks essentially that have become better over time, almost off the shelf for many folks to be able to go and just pull up APIs and start writing it. And then it really comes down to the use cases, right? Like what are the use cases that are going to be helping you solve some of these problems? And I think in the past to what there is today, in the past, there was a heavy emphasis on models and what type of models you build and how proprietary are those models. But today you start seeing a lot of these things being open source. It's less about the model and more about the quality of data you're capturing. And you don't need billions and billions of data points now. You can actually get started with a few samples, right? And so to be able to get that and start training your models on that. We also see a consumer shift, right? There is an appetite for consuming information through audio, right? People love Spotify. People love listening to podcasts. People liked hopping on Clubhouse and listening to audio that way. So for us, when we look at this like ecosystem of enablers, it's not just the technology, but it's also how have consumer habits or user habits changed over time. And then we go back to this concept of semantic understanding, right? GPT-3 is able to take this entire text and then start breaking it down, almost doing just generative creation of what people would say. And sometimes when we look at these summaries that Fireflies generates using GPT-3, you can't tell the difference between like, did that human write that or did like a machine write that? How did the machine understand that this was important or this is significant? And then how did it paraphrase and put all of this stuff together? So things that I would have thought like it's not even possible, voice is like too far ahead, like there's just so much more work we need to do. That was me a few years ago to now like anything is possible, like with the technology, the GPUs, the resources that are available. it's almost anything is possible. And it's like having these Legos today and being able to build something and like create something in real life and see it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Krish nailed a lot of the things I was going to say, but I'll add on to a little bit to everything. The way I like to think about things is, Krish kind of mentioned a few things about how you recognize voice, and I typically ask this question to people is, how do you describe your own voice? And people would say, oh, well, I have this kind of pitch, and I speak at this rate. And these are like very high level features.
Yeah.
These are you could maybe count them all on one hand. You could probably like explain your voice on one hand, and I'm pretty sure 5 things about your voice. You could probably label 5 things about your voice. This is where deep learning comes into effect. Before this, everyone was taking like a parametric approach in terms of building up these models. So models existed, except they were heavily relied on statistics, and you need tons and tons of data to actually build a more accurate model. And it actually was, it was a linear correspondence to like the amount of data you have and how accurate your model became. And deep learning is great at that. Deep learning is fantastic at finding hundreds and hundreds of thousands of features that you and I actually recognize but can't really describe. Like a lot of people probably sound like me, but it's not like every time I go visit my family, they have to like recalibrate and understand, oh, that's okay. Yes, that's what he sounds like. It's like they kind of remember, even though there are probably dozens of other people who sound exactly like me. I have like 2 brothers, and one of them probably sounds, he looks like me, so he probably sounds a lot like me too. We have like deep learning helps quite a bit with this. And then previously, like Krish mentioned, you needed tons and tons of data to get anything done, and you needed compute. And compute was expensive, and data was kind of inaccessible. It was either very expensive or inaccessible. And we've really made strides on both ends. How do you take less amount of data, and then how do you compute it on your mobile device? Or how do you get things to work on, well, first of all, how do you compute large models on huge amounts of compute, but then how do you deploy those on low resource systems? And we've made progress on like each of those angles that make all of this possible.
So I've tried both of your products and they're amazing. Why then do so many other things still suck? So one of the questions from the audience is kind of like, okay, every time I dial any IVR for any customer service thing that's going on, it ends up with a bunch of expletives. No one in the audience said that, I added that. But that's what I do. And, half the time, even though I have the same Alexa in my house for, 8 years. So is it that a lot of companies do not yet know and are not know-how and are not deploying some of this cutting edge technology? Or is it the implementation? Any thoughts on that? I know it's kind of not your problem, but I'm curious your views on why there's still some things out there that are just quite terrible, and people may not want to believe that voice is here.
Yeah, so Sanjay, you mentioned one of this in the upcoming trends is about like this no code, low code. How do you get AI or voice to start building code and writing code? And so that is a very specific use case, right? Or vertical use case. A lot of people, when they think about voice AI today, immediately comes Siri, Alexa, Google Home, and they take a very generalized approach to AI. And I don't think that we're there in terms of this general master AI like solution that does everything for everyone. And though consumer gives you a lot of these interesting avenues to pursue, with voice AI, a lot of those things are industry specific, use case specific, even company specific. So if I want to be able to create a product or a function specific to what I'm trying to do, we have to get the subtleties of that use case really well defined and work within those parameters, especially when we know that voice AI, GPT-3, some of these solutions have like a standard deviation of error that can happen, right? In the past, what people used to do is keyword mapping. So the reason IVR doesn't work really well is people are doing keyword mapping. They're just trying to catch that one word, or the system is trying to catch that one word. When I'm talking about plane tickets, they might say, oh, that's related to pricing. Okay, makes sense. If I'm talking about returns, they're going to say, do you need to return that? And that can also have a whole range of errors, right? When I'm talking about returns, I'm not talking about rating, or I don't want to give you a rating right now. So there's a lot of that. And when I look at call center technology today, people are actually moving away, taking the underlying infrastructure and moving away from, you know, the old school NLP rules-based engines to now, you know, these like deep learning models, things that you can get out of the box. I know like Five9, which is a call center software product, they partner with Google, and Google has this amazing product called Diagflow, right? Which helps you build these things. And Diagflow, you can do it almost without writing much code. So a lot of these are possible. It just depends on the scope and how well you define it, right? And so that's really the big difference that I see when someone's trying to go do a generalized approach.
Yeah. The what I think what Chris is trying to say is they should all use Fireflies and things would be a lot better. And I think a lot of it's kind of a joke, but it's also serious. Is a lot of the incumbents that are sitting in this area, large companies have been on this treadmill for a very, very long period of time. And it's not very easy to build like this entire system, like rules-based system, which primarily a lot of the IVRs you call Verizon or AT&T today still rely on. And then all of a sudden, quite literally overnight, introduce machine learning and deep learning, which blows it out of the water. And it's not very easy for those systems to kind of recalibrate that quickly in order to use the latest technology. So there's always a lag in between, you know, what these large companies are actually using in terms of technology, and they might be relying on, you know, I'm not going to say any names, but large companies that exist out there in pre-existing systems. And for them to migrate from that to more neural-based approaches, it's not super trivial for them to do. And I think a testament to that is, you know, I mean, speech recognition. I'm pretty sure like Krish and I think, I don't know which one is older, but I'm pretty sure it predates both of us. And so we didn't start, it's the same with text-to-speech. It's not like we invented it. But for a long period of time, there wasn't a hell of a lot going on. And then it kind of overnight with deep learning, machine learning, a lot more was possible. And the accuracy just went up like crazy. And we saw this like concurrently, not just with voice technology, but you see this with eye tracking, for example. You see this with post detection and with augmented reality. You've had virtual reality going on for decades, but only now is it actually becoming a bit more mainstream. And a lot of this with speech recognition, particularly, you'll see there's an abundance of companies that are starting this. And it turns out like, oh, you can do generalized speech recognition, and you could do like speech recognition for just healthcare and medical terms, and that could be like a stream on its own, and that could be further optimized. So yeah, it's a lot of it. A lot of the systems are relatively old, but they're improving so quickly, and there's a lag in between what you experience as consumers versus like what the current state of the art is. And I think that's why Krish and I both are excited. Is we have the privilege of being at the state of the art, and we can see the industry is going to catch up in 2 to 3 years from now. And that's going to be phenomenal. And probably 2 to 3 years from now, we'll be sitting at state of the art, and we'll be hoping for the next 2 to 3 years to make it even better. So there's always that lag between what you see or hear or interface as a consumer and what's actually state of the art. Is always there's always a couple of years of lag there.
And I think
sorry, please go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to say like one last point to add to that is the fear with using anything state of the art or new is unlike other solutions, like when you had cloud adoption or mobile, there is a fixed solution or fixed answer. But with machine learning and deep learning, it's black box. So you don't even know sometimes what sort of output you're going to get. We've had many instances where, wow, we have a ton of new data, let's train it. And actually the output ends up getting worse. It's like, why is that? So there's a lot more of black box solutions. You're just getting something out and something's getting spit out. And as a larger business, you don't want to take that risk, right? And so there is that factor, which I can understand why a lot of people would be more hesitant to switch over to this sort of technology.
That's a great segue into a question from the audience, which is now that there's less emphasis on models and building models themselves. And I think that's even leapfrogged with this concept now of foundational models, right? Where you have to start from scratch every single time. What are the challenges that you see with data and training? And, Chris, you just started talking about that, but there's the data, there's the training and the sort of customization to verticals, to domains, et cetera. And then there's also people. Like how many people are there that know, what to even do with these models? Yes, it's easier, but you still need to know what to do. So would love both of your thoughts. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, maybe I can start. So there's, you mentioned data and training. The requirements around data have like significantly decreased, and you said like foundational models, and there's this trend of you could take like deep tech like OpenAI with GPT-3 and create more stuff on top of that with far less data, and that's really powerful. You can create all sorts of applications with low amounts of data, realistic data for normal customers or normal users to actually possess. So we're not talking like Google level data anymore. Before it used to be like you kind of needed to be Google in order to build a really good recommendation or a search engine. And I think one of the industries is kind of a tangent, but one of the industries that's going to change is search engines. Google's been around for a long time, and they're quite literally a possibility where the way people search for information or the way people browse and try to find what they're looking for is most likely going to change in the next 4, 5, 6 years. And I know there's plenty of startups doing that. In terms of data, with most deep learning companies, what Chris just mentioned right before that, bad data hurts so much more than good data. Like you might have a little bit of bad data that's mislabeled, has noise to it, etc., and that will basically mess up everything else in there. At the end of the day, most of these systems, most of these models are fairly naive in the sense of it's data in, data out type of thing. You feed it something, it learned. You tell it, like from our perspective, if you keep saying the word, if you keep making your R's into T's, our models will start making R's into T's because that's how you speak, right? That's what an R is now. So it really does rely on what kind of data you're passing in and what kind of data you're getting out. We spent a lot of time, personally, like our company spent a lot of time worrying about data requirements because what we realized is even large customers, small customers, they just don't have that kind of data that it's like super clean and organized and labeled really well. They're coming in with data sets that are pre-recorded, that have human errors in them. And if we're going to turn around and actually deliver a software product, I think a lot of deep tech software is still like, the typical landing page, go there, sign up, talk to somebody and see you in a month type of thing. Whereas we're really trying to change that behavior to being, you come in with whatever data you have, and the data pipelining becomes just as valuable as the model, because that pipeline needs to handle terrible data, clean it up, figure out what data to use, what data to clean, etc., and then build the model from there. A good example of this is something that we just recently, launched or is launching on March 9th, I believe. We worked with Netflix on making a docuseries for Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol, for those who don't know, died in the 80s. He's the guy behind Campbell Soup. Fantastic artist, like an amazing guy. But all of his recordings were in the 70s. So you can, even studio recordings were like telephone recordings. So it's like way worse than Zoom right now. And so when we collected the data, we realized there's only 3 minutes and 12 seconds of him speaking coherently in like one particular environment. That's like the most we can find in one environment, but we have to make those 3 minutes and 12 seconds work. So getting, first of all, figuring out like out of the about 10 minutes of data that we actually had, 3 minutes and 12 seconds is all we can actually use. And then if you add a little bit, if you add anything that's apart from those 3 minutes and 12 seconds, it'll start getting away from what it should actually sound like. But just having the ability to go from that to, first of all, building something that sounds like him, and then something that can deliver speech like him. And that's where like all these modern techniques of like data augmentation and fine-tuning abilities of like taking like a base model that's learned from hundreds of hours of speakers and is able to extrapolate from Andy's voice to the closest thing to Andy's voice. So you don't necessarily need Andy there all the time to say every single phoneme out there. That's where it becomes super powerful. And yeah, that's like the biggest challenges around data sets and training, where I think the amounts of improvement that we've made have really made it possible to do things that weren't possible maybe even 3 years ago.
It's amazing. I think that is one set of things that could prove not an obstacle, but you have to figure out how to use the data and how to tune your models and how to make it work. There's a couple of questions coming from the audience around, you know, what might be some of the other hurdles or obstacles that we still do face, having now overcome some as well. And one in particular that was asked is around, you know, sort of security and privacy. And it's funny, I was actually using Fireflies in a team meeting, and one of our team members used to do the notes, and he would basically, you know, write down what everyone said. And when somebody said something they didn't want in like the meeting notes, right, he would erase it. And somebody asked, well, now that we're using Fireflies, everything is recorded. Like we can't make those, you know, jokes about X person, because like there's a system of record now of everything that you said. And, you know, I can imagine also, you know, as you're generating new voices, you know, there's licensing and all of that, which I'm sure you can figure out, but somebody could, you know, emulate my voice and, you know, call my children's school and, you know, act like they're, you know, their parent. How do you guys think about security and privacy, and really like in a sense, voice, especially face-to-face voice conversations used to be like, are like the last bastion of, you know, privacy in a sense. And now when all of that is sort of, you know, recorded and analyzed and synthesized, how do you think about that from a human perspective, as well as, you know, ethics and you know, compliance and so forth?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting, you know, segue, because we, especially the past year, have seen that there's this fine line that's always there to balance between what makes an individual happy that uses Fireflies versus what makes an enterprise IT admin happy. And so voice does provide like things around compliance, recording, how do you manage your data? So we feel like that there is a world where you can make both sides happy. For us, it was always about delivering value to the end user first, right? We want you to be productive. We want you to be able to have all your notes and everything available. You should be able to search back. You should have all of this. Now you're creating tons and tons of data for the organization. And so that's when admins come in or managers come in and say, okay, how do I make certain things private? How do I give access to certain features? How do I make sure that certain teammates don't have access to certain settings? So in the past year, we've spent a lot of time thinking about being SOC 2 compliant, providing guardrails in terms of what can be trained on, what can't be trained on, creating admin settings and access management. So this is almost all things around guardrails so that the voice engine just doesn't go off on its own, or an individual doesn't go do things on their own. But I do think that there has also been this general acceptance of conversational intelligence and voice AI software, especially for the value that the recordings and the transcription provide versus the hassle of doing it. And so people have understood, wow, I can actually train my teams. I can, you know, save a ton of time. I can make my workforce productive. So there is some of those things. But even in the voice AI space, like for the specific example you mentioned, the thing that came to my mind was, oh, we should have some sort of way to do redaction while the meeting is happening, right? Where you can have certain parts of the meeting redacted. And I think that's a very possible solution. Like, it's not crazy difficult to do, but it is possible. And it's almost very similar to how you have your person sitting and taking notes and writing things down. versus someone speaking. And if they could say, hey, Fireflies, redact the last like 30 seconds or the last 5 minutes of the meeting. So that's where I think like when you say like voice can become this universal interface, everything we can do typing and doing text, I think it's very much possible with voice. And when you have more of that optionality to do stuff with voice, that's going to make it more and more acceptable for people to use, knowing that there are still guardrails in place. Yeah.
I guess this the ethics question comes up a lot for us. Our stance is basically it's twofold. One is our application itself, something that we actually deeply care about. We're making sure that every voice that we create has consent that's attached to it. And we make sure that every voice, the data belongs to the owner and they have control over where their voice is being used, et cetera. We have watermarking techniques. So when we're generating content, we can detect when it's generated by us. The important discussion is not us, it's actually what can everyone else do? It's, is my TV listening to me right now? Stuff like that. So community-wise, it's almost like what we've done is we've realized that there is watermarking techniques, but I mean, I'm not going to be able to force everyone in the world to put watermarks on the audio that they're creating. But what can we do instead? Well, maybe we can write some sort of a deep learning model that is able to detect deepfakes to a certain degree, and we can feed that more data, and we can go the inverse route as well. So we've actually open sourced a code base that comes alongside a model that is able to, out of the box, you feed it real data, then you pass it audio clips, and it can tell you who the speaker is, but it can also tell you whether it's real or fake. And we think that's like one step of doing that. And then I think the third thing is it's more human. It's you go watch, a movie and there's a boat and it's sinking. I'm sure you're not sitting there thinking that boat is actually sinking. And those actors are maybe not going to survive this scene. Or, a more realistic example is you go watch a commercial for Burger King and they show you this Whopper. And then it's not like every time you go to the store and you order a Whopper and you're like, see, they duped me again. I've been fooled. And it's like you've kind of conditioned yourself that every time you see that Whopper, it's not going to be real. It's like you can't trust everything on a magazine. You can't trust everything that you hear. You can't trust everything that you read. And this is similarly, I think educationally, we have to tell people that you can't trust everything that you hear either. Most of the customers that we work with, we have this discussion with them on how they're using their artificial voices. And most of the time it's doing things, again, that aren't possible by humans. Getting our AI technology is able to get speakers to speak in different languages. Most of us can maybe speak 2 languages. But what if I need, Krish to speak French, Spanish, Italian, German, Dutch, because Krish is like the spokesperson for Fireflies, and I'm sure he has German customers. That's not, I'm sure, maybe Krish knows German, I don't know. But but getting him to speak German, and AI, like the AI can do that and get Krish to speak fluent German. And those are like the typical use cases that we're focused on, things that human beings can't do. And the rest of it, I think it's a lot about education and getting people aware of AI and technology and being more skeptical of what's going on.
Yeah, that's actually a fascinating psychological shift, but you're right. We do that visually, we do that with so many other media, but we have to start training ourselves. There's a question from the audience about, should voice replace other UIs, or maybe all UIs? And I made this bold statement mainly because of my desire to only use voice. I hate typing and I hate looking at screens. And it's a great question. I might offer, since I kind of made this statement myself, that it should be a choice, right? And this is where choice and accessibility, but accessibility in a very broad way. So why do I do all my emails on my mobile phone? It's because I can be anywhere and I can use my voice and I don't have to sit in front of my laptop and type anymore. And I know there's a voice feature on my Mac, but it doesn't work as well, right? The dictation just doesn't work. So I think it's a choice thing, but I think the more you have really simple interfaces to anything complex, it increases inclusivity. More people can access it. That's my view. It doesn't mean it should necessarily replace, but it should be an option. I'd love to hear Zohaib and Krish, your views on this question.
Yeah, maybe I can go first. So I used to work at a startup called Hipmunk before. Hipmunk was a travel search engine. It was like Kayak or Expedia. And one of our brilliant parts of Hipmunk was our UI was a Gantt chart. So if you're an engineer, you know what a Gantt chart is. And Hipmunk was like founded by an engineer, which is why the UI was basically a Gantt chart. Our UI was a core focus of what we were trying to do. And when we were trying to figure out, this is in like 2014, 2015, we were trying to figure out like, how do we improve our UI? We actually made our first chatbot at that time. I actually wrote it on a Friday. It was worked through email. It was copied off another startup called X.AI or Clara Labs, which was doing like assistance over email. And that was like our first entry into, you would shoot an email to hello@hipmunk.com and you would ask a travel question, and half the questions would be answered. And we kind of used the dumb methods that Krish mentioned earlier, keyword detection. You know, you say flight to, you're obviously taking a flight. You say going to Seattle from, you know, New York, you're obviously taking a flight, not taking a train, probably. So we would do keyword detection, figure out what you want to do. But then what we really wanted to know is like, what kind of questions are people really asking that they can't just click on? Like that's what was back in our mind. I was like, you know, obviously you want to use the mobile app. We spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars building this thing. You should probably use it. It's pretty good. And we started noticing questions like, you know, common things that we eventually put into the application, but seemed more natural when it was natural language. So questions like, I need to book a hotel in New York because I'm going for a conference and I have a few meetings, so make sure there's a Starbucks nearby. And it's like, holy crap, usually to do this query, you need to open up Google Maps. Like the average person today, probably when they're planning a trip, opens up Google Maps, opens up Expedia or something, searches for a flight and a hotel, and then they look at the address of the hotel, look at like where it is on a map, look at like how far the Starbucks is. And they're like playing this game between these different applications. And that query is much easy to solve. And it's hard to do in a UI. It's much easier to do in a voice interface. And I think that's where voice really shines, is when you have these complicated queries. Or the other area where it really shines is I'm a big believer that one day everyone's going to be in self-driving cars because, you know, why not? I hate driving. And when you are in a vehicle that is moving, your attention still needs to be on the road. But, you know, the primary way that you're going to talk to this interface, you know, it's going to be by voice. You'd much rather do that. I actually have a niece. You could have YouTube in your car these days, but she does everything by voice. She's like 6 years old, and her go-to thing is she can basically find out anything on the internet, any question she has, because she can't type as well yet, but she knows how to talk. So she will naturally just press the button and just say the question out loud. And it seems like that's a much more natural way of her asking that question, getting the right answer, than it is for some of us, because some of us have already been kind of, you know, we've been biased by using a phone or inputting by text. But to someone that's like a child that has spoken for the first 5 or 6 years of life with everything, the computer is just another thing that they can talk to, and they can ask it a question, they can give it an answer, and that makes perfect sense for them. So in a lot of areas, it's critical for us to think like where it makes a lot of sense. In some cases, it's really hard. Like I thought about programming with voice and programming with like just voice interface. And like this has been like, I haven't been thinking about it. A lot of people are thinking about it, but it's just naturally hard just because most programmers, they go through their entire, you know, school system writing stuff on a pen with a paper, or they type stuff. And so therefore that seems a lot more natural. It almost seems like when I'm typing something, I can think better. Whereas when I'm voicing something, my thoughts are all over the place and I really don't even know where to focus. And that seems like, maybe it's not quite there yet for that. Maybe that particular use case isn't meant for that interface. So that's how I think about it, is there's some that are quite obvious and some that are not so obvious.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of both. So for one, it's our value prop is that you should be able to go through a 1 hour meeting in 5 minutes or less. And part of it is actually being able to listen to that meeting at 2x speed while also reviewing the transcript. And we've actually done some tests and experiments where we found that people retain information a lot better when they can visually listen and talk, and as well as read it. I actually was, as we were sitting here and looking at Resemble, like one of the ideas that came to me is we have these really interesting GPT-3 summaries of like a 1 hour meeting, that summarizes it down like, 20 pages of a transcript for a meeting down into like 2 paragraphs. And the other thing is I'm in the car. I don't want to be able to like sit and read through each of these. So I can listen to my meetings today, right? Like almost like Spotify, listen to my meetings. But one thing I'd love is for through like my teammate's voice or something, the summaries to be told to me. And so I could use text to speech and GPT-3 and then listen to that. So there are times when I want to be sitting and reading and it's just faster for me to consume that information. And there's other times where I would rather sit and listen. And, even when I watch YouTube today, there's nothing that I would watch at 1x speed. It has to be at 2x speed. So like, I just feel like for some people, like the ability to retain and learn is a lot faster through voice. Just as simple as asking queries. And we have like use cases in like the area, like in our space, right? Like you can ask Siri for, who was the 40th president of the United States. Similarly, in the enterprise, maybe you can ask like, hey, pull up the report from Q2 on our growth. But if you could actually go a step further and say, hey, generate a new report of what are our key growth areas for next quarter. And so not only is it pulling up information for me, but it's also actually, putting stuff together, which would require me to go through 10 spreadsheets and like, 20 like databases to pull that information up. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff you can do with voice where it's a combination of both. I think the last part I'll mention is like with voice, you can also get very subjective things answered. So right now you can just get like a meeting and transcribe, but you could potentially ask the system, like, what did you think about this candidate? All right, like, or what were the pros and cons of it? And it can objectively, maybe, obviously you want to eliminate bias when you're training, but say, hey, here were the pros, here are the cons compared to other candidates. And then you have all that information. And I'm like, yeah, thanks GPT-3. That gives me an interesting perspective as I make my decision. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Funny, that reminds me, and these are the surprising things that happen when you have this technology. My 3-year-old son told Alexa, I love you. And I was like, I wonder what she's going to say. And she started singing this song, thanking him for expressing his feelings. And it's interesting because this sounds like a silly example, but there's so much more you can do in voice in this interaction than, if you had to type it in or something. So I thought that was interesting and surprising. I did want to highlight one more question from the audience before we run out of time. We haven't really talked about business model innovation, customer reaction and receptiveness. We've talked a lot about technology and limitations and security and privacy. Couple of quick thoughts maybe to round out on, can business model innovation, or are you guys doing anything in particular to democratize some of these technologies and products so more people understand and can use them? And what has customer reaction been like, whether it's individual users or enterprise customers? Would love, your thoughts here.
I'll do a really quick thing because I think about this almost every day, because if you think about 5 years ago, maybe even a few years ago, the cost of transcription was almost $1 a minute to get really good human accurate transcription. So you're going to be spending $60 for like a 1 hour session, right? Today, like when customers can use a service almost a la carte or like as a buffet model where they can consume almost as much as they want and they're paying a flat, subscription rate for it. So that's a game changer right there, because now there's so much cost reduction. You can offer it as a SaaS solution where you're paying a monthly rate to use it. So that's something that we think about a lot. And I think the other things I would add to it so that Zohaib can jump in is people are going to do pricing as a service. People can also open source their APIs and then monetize for other aspects rather than the actual technology. I think with utility-based pricing and like open APIs, like it just makes it easier for a community to build and maybe improve your models as well. So there are some companies that I've seen where they will give things out for free in efforts to train their system or get better data and make things better. So I think, yeah, that's like the main thing is cost reduction makes it more ubiquitous. And then if people can use it a lot, there's going to be like more ways to think about it and, evolve on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll quickly just add to that. So when we started Resemble, our key goal, and I remember actually talking to a early potential investor, and they looked at me and said, Zohaib, like, you actually don't know what Resemble is going to be used for. And it was totally true. It's like YouTube. YouTube was built as a dating website, and then YouTube got this kind of lucky because camcorders quickly went away and mobile phones got cameras, and the camera became more important than the phone itself. So everyone started using camera for everything, and YouTube is like for vloggers and all sorts of content that's like generated by people, and it kind of ushered in TikTok and Instagram, etc. A lot of the motivations around what we're building with generative audio stem from the same thing. It's people haven't even experienced generative voice to a certain degree. So a lot of what our business model is letting people have that experience, and then them thinking about what's possible and talking to us about it, other than us being gatekeepers and telling them, oh, here's a few cool demos. Like, trust me, it works. But if you want, you have to have a big budget, which used to be the case. So we actually have a freemium model. Anyone can go in and build their own free custom voice. It takes 50 samples, which is about 2 minutes of your time. You say those samples out loud, the computer will understand it. Within the next 20 minutes, you'll get an email saying your model is ready. Type something in, it'll read it in your voice. And that process, there's no better sales process for us than that demo. It's basically, I can sit here talk all day about how our technology is so great, but it'll convince Sandhya a lot more when she actually just like tries it for 2 minutes, and then she's like, holy crap, it actually has my voice. It actually has maybe my accent, and it has exactly how I would say that word. And that process actually stems or ignites a lot more creativity in our customers, and they typically come back to us with use cases that we haven't even thought of. Use cases around like, and we equip every call center agent with their personal voice. So not like we don't have one voice for our call center, but we have like one for every customer agent. Can we like my actor, or I'm an actor that is going through puberty, and my voice is about to change, and it's very, very valuable. So can I retain it in some way? And a lot of people worry about this, and this wasn't even possible before. But and it's not a use case that we're actively thinking of as we're starting to build Resemble, but it is very, very important to some people. So a lot of it is like giving our technology to as many people as possible. We've built over 140,000 voices now. And that's just like a start of it. We get hundreds and hundreds of voices being built every day now. And then every week, every day, we get more and more use cases that we're kind of scratching our heads and thinking like, oh, I guess that does make sense.
Zohaib, Sandhya, Krish, this was phenomenal. As you can see from the audience question, we are not going to get to every one of those questions, and we could go on for hours, but truly mind-blowing. Voice as a universal digital interface, the mind-expanding set of applications, and we are only scratching the surface. Could not be more excited about where this technology goes. As we round out and close, if each of you could just share, and maybe starting with Sandhya, your favorite voice application, other than the ones that you've invested in, and for your own company, for Krish and Zohaib, and one message for TiE youth that's diving into this event. Sandhya.
Yeah, so mine is boring. It's actually just plain old dictation, because I spend so much time interfacing, with email and messaging, that it just makes my life a lot easier. I also think and take notes and write through dictation, though I am very excited about the prospect of navigating applications through voice, which is just starting to emerge. And then to your message, I think the two other panelists we have here today are just amazing examples of following your passion, betting on technology and the curve of technology to meet your vision, but think big, think ambitious, and take risk like Zohaib and Krish have done. and it will serve you well, as we see today.
Zohaib.
Okay, so I also use, so this has been like a personal discovery of mine. I actually stole it from someone else who said it out loud in another conference, and I was like, holy crap, that's a great idea. I should steal it. So I've been using a dictation app to basically write down notes. So I use Otter AI, and I realized like a lot of my work could be done. I don't use it for meetings or anything. I literally use it as a journal. And basically I think what I want to achieve is this, and this, the product doesn't even exist yet. And if someone makes it, that'd be fantastic. But me to be able to talk and write down my notes or speak out my notes as I'm going throughout my day. And so by the time I sit down to write, I don't know, a company memo, or by the time I sit down to write an investor update, or when I sit down to write a marketing blog post or think about like product planning, et cetera, I kind of have all these thoughts in place already. And it kind of works pretty well right now, but it could be, I don't think it's the voice capability. I think it's just the application wasn't quite meant for that. But I think that's been like a life changer so far. It's like, just being able to speak out my thoughts as I go, and then kind of just quickly organize them such that when I actually get down to actually doing that piece of work, it's 70% done. And it's just me like collecting those thoughts and organizing them rather than sitting there and being like, okay, time to get started. Where do I begin? I think that's been my favorite use of voice tech so far. It's been the most impactful.
For me, it's voice editing. So I'm in a lot of different podcasts or events, and or I have to record a session and then present it, like a video recording of that. So there are some tools out there like Clean Voice, which will automatically go in, get rid of the filler words that I say if I'm saying ums a lot, get rid of awkward pauses and other things. And it makes video editing super, super simple. And I can go back in maybe and remove certain parts of like the things that I said, like redact, like things that sounded like I was, rambling. So I think that's a great use case for voice, something I've been using a lot. And it also has helped me be more conscientious of how I speak. And next time I'm like, oh, I don't want to have to do this much editing. I don't want to see this many filler words. So I'm naturally able to say, oh, there were 80 filler words in this like 10-minute segment. Not going to do that next time. So yeah, I think that's a great use case for anyone, marketer, any person that's creating video content, to be able to use a tool that automatically removes all the filler words and silences.
Amazing. And a message for TiE youth.
Yeah, I think that it is really about, the tools today. You don't need to be a PhD. So really look at the problem you're trying to solve. And there are APIs out there, like things you can use off the shelf. So I will repeat that. Like we started out, doing this stuff on emails, and then we switched to chatbots, and then we later jumped to voice. So the technology has come a lot further. And if like the tools that are available today, just go out there and like jump in and like play with the resources. And many of them are giving it out for free for developers to start with. So it's the best time.
Amazing. Sandhya, Krish, Zohaib, thank you. Thank you to our audience for your fantastic participation, to the TiE team and Molly, who worked so hard to get this series together. Sandhya, Krish, Zohaib, a huge standing ovation to each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy weekend.